Here's the fun part of our debate. We get to have someone from the opposing side. Courtney will begin to ask questions of Reuben about the points that he is making. Courtney.
Thank you, Reuben. I appreciate that. That was really good. So I have a question about your introductory section. You mentioned faith and a person's faith kind of being the pivotal thing that their salvation depends on. So I want to ask you, where is this faith coming from? Is it coming from himself or from Jesus Christ?
Again, God is the initiator of salvation, but then it's contingent on our faith. I mean, there's so many verses talking about be strong in your faith, stand on guard. This is talking about like a person's own doing, not necessarily just all God. So I would say probably both.
Okay, so if it is contingent on a person's faith and their choice to believe, how then does that not become a works righteousness salvation?
Yeah, again, because faith, I'm not talking about works or good deeds, and that's the thing. I'm not talking about sin per se. I'm talking about faith, which I think is talked about so much in the Bible. I mean, even John 3:16, like, whoever believes, and that's the whole point. Faith, believing, like putting your trust in Jesus. It's not a works-based gospel, and that was kind of like my point. We're not talking about good deeds necessarily, but the one thing is faith.
I understand you're not talking about good deeds, but it is still a work of oneself to believe. I think that's what you're saying, right?
I mean, again, it's initiated by God. It's not a work, whereas it is a mindset or a belief or a relationship, I would say.
Okay.
Or a lifestyle is even better.
Okay. So then how do you think this links to the idea of regeneration as far as that goes? So because your salvation is contingent upon your own ability to believe, how then does one become regenerate if they are dead in their sins?
Can you define regenerate?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know what regeneration means, it's basically like the work of the Holy Spirit or God in your heart to transform you into a new person, like a new creation, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how that's doesn't happen with what I'm saying though, because you're still going to be born again. God works through you. That's the whole point, through your faith to make you born again, if that makes sense.
He does work through your faith, but I'm asking specifically about salvation. How do you become a regenerate? Do you become a regenerate person in and of yourself and your own choice then?
No. Again, Christ makes you born again. That's what.
So it's Christ's work that accomplishes salvation.
Yes. I don't know if I'm understanding your question totally, but yeah, I would say yeah. That achieves the salvation, yes, because no one can achieve salvation. But again, it is contingent though on faith, but you're not earning it. Again, it's not something that you earn. But yeah, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'm not sure that it does, but
okay.
Oh, this is why debates are fun.
Okay. So I will address your first point as far as false assurance also. If one
Excuse me one second, Courtney.
Yes.
Do you wish to continue asking questions, or do you wish to go to your part?
I will continue asking.
All right, go ahead.
If one, as far as the false assurance goes, is willfully sinning, seemingly from what your explanation was, somewhat without conviction of the Holy Spirit, how are you considered saved in that aspect? If you have no conviction, then you continue to sin willfully over and over again.
I don't think can you rephrase the question? I don't know if I understand.
Yeah, as far as you were talking about false assurance.
Yeah, so okay, so believing that you're a part of the elect maybe doesn't cause false assurance, but believing that you are eternally secure, I'm talking about, then does. So, which problem do you have with that?
I have a problem with what you mentioned as far as, someone who would be supposedly saved in the elect, choosing to sin over and over again without remorse.
No, again, I was talking about a hypothetical. I don't think someone like that would actually be saved. But I'm just talking about more from a realistic or kind of practical too argument of it just doesn't work in real life. If that makes sense. It was kind of a hypothetical. But maybe we should move on from that question because I don't know.
Your time for asking Reuben questions has come to an end. However, the good news is that now you get to tell not not only Reuben, but everybody here, why a person cannot lose their salvation. Please go ahead.
Okay, so my position theologically is that you cannot lose your salvation, as I mentioned before. And my position essentially is characterized and organized around the central theme of the sovereignty of God. So I hold to the idea that God's sovereignty outweighs pretty much anything that a person can accomplish, and that He is the sole actor in salvation and creation, and that He irresistibly draws those to Him whom He's predestined to be saved. So it's God's choice and not our own. And it's completely His work and Jesus Christ's work on the cross that saves us. And supposing that one could lose one's salvation, I take the position, would be almost equivalent to denying the sufficiency of Christ's saving work. If you are able to choose whether to be saved or not, you are in a sense nullifying the work of Christ and His power through the death and resurrection. And I would argue that His regenerative work in us is going to be the pivotal piece of this argument, as far as it is Him alone who is able to regenerate us, and if we have any part or contingency in that, that becomes cooperative and not necessarily something that is only solely God's work. And a quote from John Calvin, whom Reuben mentioned, it says this: God preordained for His own glory the display of His attributes of mercy and justice, a part of the human race, without any merit of their own, to eternal salvation, and another part, in just punishment of their sin, to eternal damnation. And I think that this argument was going to stem very much from Romans and Ephesians, talking about someone being dead in their sins and transgressions and unable to save themselves without the work of Christ. Because if there was any part of us that was powerful enough to save even a part of ourselves, that contingency is a real problem, because that would mean that we would have some power to save ourselves and take away from the power that Christ demonstrated on the cross. And that's it.
Reuben, then you now have the opportunity to ask of Courtney whatever questions you will about her position.
Gotcha. So, you say that we're unable to say, you say Christ is the person who initiates regeneration. But I didn't say I disagree with that. I said without Christ, we could not be saved. So I'm saying Christ does initiate that for us. But I'm saying it's still contingent on faith. Does that make sense? So where do we disagree on that? I don't think we would.
I disagree with the contingency. I think that it is not contingent on our faith, but it is contingent on the work of Christ alone. So I think that Christ is the one who completely enables us to have faith.
Yeah.
So our faith is something that is given by God and not something that we achieve on our own.
Interesting. So how would you respond to all the times in the Bible, as my second point said, about apostasy? So apostasy is turning away from the faith, right? So is the Bible lying? Is this some sort of metaphorical apostasy? How would you define apostasy?
I mean, apostasy in that sense, I would say they were never saved. And I think John Calvin would agree with me on that one.
But if they're never saved, then it's not actually apostasy. Does that make sense? Because they're not turning away from it.
The Bible never uses the term apostasy, however, it does describe stories of people who seem to be saved.
I just said a scripture though that said apostasy. So to say that it never uses apostasy, I don't think is true. It's also a Greek word. I forget the word, but it's used a couple times, I think, in 2 Thessalonians when it talks about the great apostasy. So sometimes it does. But we can move on. Okay, so how would you explain Ananias and Sapphira then? If they lied to the Holy Spirit, both of them did, how would they do that?
I would say they were never part of the body of Christ. They were never part of it.
So do unsaved people then have the Holy Spirit? Because that's what you would have to conclude.
It said that they lied to the Holy Spirit, but it said that Satan was in their hearts. And so I would ask, if Satan is in their hearts, how is there room for the Holy Spirit?
Silence or I'll clear the room.
It also says, and I didn't get to this, Acts 5:9, that Peter said, "You're wise that you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to test." So again, it's putting the you as in them, not necessarily Satan doing it.
Does that mean that the Holy Spirit is within them?
I would say yes, and then they fell away from the faith. That's what I would conclude.
I think that they fell away from the body of Christ, but I don't know if they were ever saved. I don't think the scriptures necessarily indicate that, but
I would disagree, but that's okay. I want to talk about, okay, question. Do you think Solomon was saved?
I can't say. Only God knows.
Oh, okay, that's a good cop-out. That's a good cop-out. Only God knows. I mean, you're right. But what do you think? Like, Solomon was talked to the Lord. Obviously, was given the gift of wisdom. They had a very close relationship. He walked with the Lord all the way until the end. So, so all that was just nothing.
I don't know. If that was God's choice to save him, then that was God's choice. But I can't be the judge of that.
I guess not. But what I'm getting at is that in the idea that you cannot lose your salvation, there's a lot of holes and there's a lot of examples that don't necessarily align with that logic.
There are, however, that's when we have to rely on the trust in Jesus Christ and His salvation, and put our trust fully in His ability to save us despite any sins we may commit or any falls that we may have.
All right, but I just think it goes to show that in our framework, in our model, whatever you want to call it, we have an answer for these examples. But I'm just saying you have to rely on I don't know. Does that make sense?
I'm not relying on I don't know. I'm relying on the trust of Jesus Christ and His salvation.
I know, but again, okay, well, I'm just going to move on. But I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point, but again, to rely on mystery instead of the labor of hard work, I think sometimes is not right. Okay, am I done?
1 minute.
Okay. So this is a question from Jeff. It says, Tertullian says God can save us how He decides to. So if God is sovereign in your own description, how you describe it, because I don't think anyone would disagree that God's sovereign, it depends how you define it, then why was it even necessary to send Christ then?
Because that was His plan from the beginning, was that He would come down and be with us. That was His sovereign plan.
I guess so, but doesn't it seem like a little arbitrary in your guys' worldview, as if God can literally do whatever He likes? I mean, Thomas Aquinas makes his argument too that He didn't have to send Christ, but that He did because He wanted to. I mean, is that kind of what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that God will willingly limit Himself, and He willingly planned that Christ would come and be the sacrifice for our sins.
I'm sorry, but this portion of our debate is over. And now we will move to the biblical